remember the exact temperature of the kitchen tile because my knees hit it first. Cold, a little gritty from the sugar I'd spilled earlier when I was rushing coffee into myself like a dare. The kettle was still hissing, the cheap one with a plastic handle that goes soft when it gets too hot. And in that ordinary soundtrack, a number arrived and opened the ceiling. $118,642,913. That was the number on the screen, not rounded, not softened, not promised. Just there, an integer with teeth. I didn't breathe for a full sentence of thought. Then I did, too much, like I was trying to drink the air. It was supposed to be a joke, a shared ritual. Two siblings who had learned to make the universe laugh with us before it laughed at us. We bought a single ticket because splitting a dream is easier than splitting a bill. I had kept a slip of paper tucked under a magnet shaped like a tired strawberry on the fridge, and for 2 days I forgot it existed every time I opened the door to reach for milk. The paper did not forget me. It waited with the ridiculous patience of small things that intend to change your life. The website took ages to load, blinking banners and a ticker that felt like a prank, and then the numbers crawled into their places, slow and ceremonial, as if they wanted me to savor each match. First one, then the second, the third like a coin landing upright, then the fourth that made my mouth go dry, then the fifth that made time go strange and slow, and finally the power number that snapped everything from maybe to yes. I read them once, twice, with the stupid superstition that if I blinked too fast, the pattern would slide away. It didn't. The digits clung to the screen like frost. The first thought was not sophisticated. It was a picture. My mother, standing at the sink in her nightgown, holding a bill and pretending the soap bubbles were interesting. Her shoulders are smaller than I remember. Time is a master thief. I have rehearsed saving her in so many ways. Scholarships, promotions, halves of rent, spontaneous groceries arranged like an apology, and suddenly I was past rehearsals. The number said it plainly. We could stop making apologies and buy time instead. The second thought was more selfish, which felt delicious and criminal in equal measure. A blue house by the sea with a staircase that doesn't groan at night, a bed with a mattress that behaves like a promise, not a compromise, a piano I would pretend I had time to learn, shoes that don't blister, books bought new, still smelling like they haven't yet been argued with by anyone. I saw the rooms before I saw the price tags. I saw windows that made winter tolerable. I stood up and felt my knees argue with gravity. The kettle clicked itself off like a polite guest leaving the party early. The slip of paper on the fridge looked suddenly obscene in its smallness, so light, the ink slightly haloed at the edges, as if it had been sweating in anticipation. I pressed it between 2 pages of an old cookbook, because superstition demands a ritual, and if money is coming, you feed it. My brother was in every frame of my mind, as inevitable as my own hands. My brother with the restless leg that keeps time with his doubts. My brother with talent packaged badly, gifted at many things and steady at none, the kind of man who can fix a sink with a butter knife and forget to eat the bread. The ticket was our dare, our pact. We had joked about splitting it 50-50 as if we were divvying up fries. It was a sweet joke because it lived in a kingdom where nothing heavy had ever happened. Now the joke sat up straight. $59,321,456.50. I let the number fan out in my mouth. After taxes, after whatever mysterious fees governments invent when you start looking like a problem, even cut in half, even shaved down to whatever net reality would demand, it was still an ocean deep enough to drown in and clean enough to baptize in. I felt myself become a student of arithmetic I had never cared about. If I paid off Mom's mortgage and put aside college funds for the kids of a future I hadn't decided I wanted. If I replaced the car that wheezed like a smoker at red lights, if I fixed the crack that ran down the living room wall like a knife mark, how much of the ocean would still be mine to swim? I made lists. I make lists when I'm happy, and I make lists when I'm scared, and sometimes the lists look the same. I wrote headings in all caps like I was filing a case. Home, mom, debt, fun, charity, brother. I paused over that last one, not because I begrudged him the ink, but because the category felt too small and too big at once. He isn't an entry, he's a root system intertwined with mine. The money would pass through us the way weather moves through a field. The field doesn't get to choose the wind. There was an irony, and I saw it glinting like foil under the cake. We had played the lottery together for the same reason we used to split vending machine candy when we were kids. It made losing bearable. This time, winning wanted to be individual, selfish, sharp. The ticket had both our fingerprints. The dream tried to arrange a seating chart. I told myself this wasn't a problem. I told myself the best parts of us would win the vote. Generosity loves to audition in the first act. The phone began to jitter on the counter, as if it too had swallowed electricity. Notifications stacked themselves like chairs. In my mind, I was already rehearsing the speech I would never give aloud. We will be smart. We will be private. We will hire a boring lawyer whose ties are the color of oatmeal. We will not buy anything with the word yacht in it, even metaphorically. We will remember how to be poor in case we need to play the part again for our own sanity. We will put the ticket in a safe that is inside another safe, and we will not tell anyone who pronounces our last name like a password. I told myself we would cash the ticket together. We would dress like people who don't need attention. We would watch the clerk's eyebrows do the little snowfall they do when something improbable becomes paperwork. We would cut the check like a wedding cake, neat and ceremonial, and we would feed each other the first bite of safety. It was sentimental nonsense, and I loved it. Sentiment keeps the wolves at the edge of the yard. Euphoria curled through me with a vinegar aftersmell I pretended not to notice. Not fear, exactly. A sense that the number was not just large, but loud, and loud things attract louder things. I thought about our aunt who hadn't texted me in 6 months and tried to feel generous about the version of her that would suddenly remember my middle name. I thought about how people frame their smiles when they smell new money, how congratulations arrives wearing a measuring tape. I thought about how the word no can get sanded down by a wind that carries other people's desires like grit. And still I floated. My body felt borrowed in the best way. I walked from room to room and reintroduced myself to each object as if I were already saying goodbye. The chipped mug with a cartoon fox that had survived 3 apartments. The folded quilt our grandmother made when we were too young to understand how labor can become love when it has no other choice. The ugly lamp I bought because it looked like it had a good personality. I wanted to honor the things that had carried me to the door of a different life. It felt fair, like tipping fate. There was a moment when the light shifted, thin cloud, brief and harmless, and the printed numbers on the ticket looked slightly different, as if they were breathing. The ink had that cheap, porous quality, a fuzz at the edges that makes you want to lick your finger and confirm it's real. I didn't. I am not a fool, only dramatic. I took a photo of the ticket and then another, as if the camera were a notary public. I emailed the photo to myself with a subject line that made me laugh, in case I lose my mind. I slid the paper into the cookbook again, between a recipe for caramel I had never attempted and a page stained with courage. I let my mind step into the future the way you lower yourself into a hot bath, slow and careful, stunned by comfort. I saw my brother grinning the grin he wears when something finally goes his way, even if the way is a narrow ribbon across a canyon. I saw us in an office with a potted plant that had suffered through 1,000 anxious applicants and would now watch us try to belong to a new species. I saw our faces on a newspaper we would pretend we didn't read. I saw strangers deciding who we were from a photograph taken too close. The irony kept glinting. We had been poor together without keeping score. We had been each other's emergency fund in polite and impolite ways. This number threatened to make us accountants of affection. 50% is clean on paper and filthy in the heart. If I offered more because I had been steadier, would generosity become a weapon? If he asked for more because the dream had always been his face talking, would need become the judge? The ticket didn't come with a manual, just a promise written in a font that made my hands shake. I opened the freezer and laughed at the bags of peas, the cheap therapy for bruises. What would the bruise of abundance look like? Would it bloom where people touched us or where they stopped? I wondered how long it would take for the first hint of envy to rise from the bottom of the glass. I am not naive, only practiced. Good news arrives with an entourage. But let me be honest with the version of myself who is reading this now, perhaps needing a reminder that joy can be real. In that first hour, I was happy. Not the hectic happiness of managing, or the fragile happiness of almost, but the dumb, full-bellied happiness of a child who has finally been handed the thing she asked for, without having to justify the asking. I walked around my small apartment and felt like gravity had signed a peace agreement. The radiator hissed its usual little serpent song, and I loved it for being exactly what it had always been. I loved the thin rug for trying so hard. I loved my own face in the mirror, wrecked with a smile I did not recognize. I touched my cheek and felt the future reach back. I told myself, in the silent grammar of promises made without witnesses, that we would be careful. We would take turns exhaling. We would not let the number erase the version of us that could be not impressed together. We would build something stubborn and ordinary out of something gaudy, and we would laugh when people expected us to become strangers because we would have practiced remembering who we were. That was the moment I should have noticed the other thing, how the room tilted just slightly toward a kind of hunger that wasn't mine. But euphoria is a brilliant host. It kept refilling my glass. It made the edges of the ticket look sharp in a sexy way, not a dangerous one. It made the ink look like certainty instead of dye. It put its arm around my shoulders and whispered the oldest lie in a kind voice. Nothing bad happens to good intentions. I pressed the cookbook closed and felt the thin pulse of paper inside it, a heartbeat I had purchased for the price of a dare. The number on the screen held steady. The kettle cooled. My lists waited like eager interns. My brother's name on my phone looked like a door I was finally allowed to open without rehearsing. In that first hour, before the world remembered how to take what it thinks it deserves, I was rich in the only way that matters. I believed we could stay the same. Chapter 2. I thought the sky would change. I thought stepping out of my apartment with a winning ticket tucked inside my bag would make the clouds bow their heads, or the pigeons scatter in some reverent choreography. But the morning after was just morning. The same cracked sidewalk, the same chewing gum fossils, the same tired neighbors clutching plastic bags like shields. Except me. I wasn't the same. I was carrying $118,642,913 in my bloodstream, and every step felt like cheating gravity. My brother came over before noon, wearing his oldest hoodie, the one with frayed cuffs. His eyes had the same mix of disbelief and hunger I felt in my own stomach. We didn't hug. We laughed instead, like kids stealing cookies. He dropped his backpack on the floor and said, "So, what now?" And that question cracked the air open. What now? Now we were supposed to be reasonable. Hire lawyers, find accountants, breathe through the tidal wave. Instead, we pulled out notebooks. 2 children with crayons disguised as adults with pens. Our handwriting slanted differently, but the words danced in the same rhythm. Houses, cars, travel, new phones, debt gone, mom saved. I scribbled blue piano without shame. He scribbled Tesla like it was a spell. We split the number on paper, right there at the kitchen table, the same table we once argued over slices of pizza. $59,321,456.50 each. We said it out loud. He whistled long and low. I pressed my hand against my chest to feel if my heart was keeping up. The first purchases were harmless, almost polite. He bought new sneakers that gleamed like arrogance. I ordered books I never had time to read. He filled the fridge with imported beers, labels in languages we couldn't pronounce. I bought Mom a recliner she'd been eyeing for years but never admitting to. We were still ourselves, just shinier. But then came the bolder moves. He wanted a car, not just any car, but something red and loud, the kind of car that announces itself before you see it. I rolled my eyes, told him it was cliché, and then betrayed myself by ordering a necklace that cost more than 3 months' rent. Irony tastes sweet when you bite into it. We promised to stay grounded. We said it like a mantra, grounded, grounded, grounded. But our feet barely touched the floor. Money doesn't let you walk. It makes you float. And floating feels suspiciously like falling if you tilt your head. I remember the first night we let ourselves dream too big. We were sitting on the balcony, city lights smeared like paint, and he said, "We could buy a building. We could buy two. We could rent out apartments and never work again." I laughed, but my laugh was brittle. I wanted to believe him, but I also knew us. We were dreamers, not landlords. We were terrible at saying no. We started teasing each other about what we'd do first. He wanted Vegas. I wanted Italy. He wanted to invest in crypto. I wanted a charity for kids who couldn't afford instruments. He called me sentimental. I called him reckless. Both words were true. I should have noticed then the way our dreams began to compete instead of dance. His eyes narrowed when I mentioned Mom's mortgage. My tone sharpened when he bragged about cars. But it was all still wrapped in laughter, sugar-coated with the novelty of being rich. Arguments disguise themselves as jokes. That's how poison first enters, sweet, unnoticed. The day we signed the official papers, the money became real in a way paper checks can't capture. Our bank accounts looked obscene, vulgar even, as if numbers weren't meant to stretch that far. I stared at the screen and felt both infinite and empty. My brother grinned like a gambler holding all the cards. That night, I bought a dress I didn't need, silk that slid through my fingers like a secret. He bought champagne we couldn't pronounce and shook the bottle on the balcony, spraying the street below. People looked up, confused, maybe jealous. For a second, I pitied them. Then I caught myself. Pity is just arrogance wearing perfume. We toasted. We told ourselves we'd never change. We promised we'd stay siblings first, millionaires second. And yet, as I watched him tilt the glass back, foam sliding down his chin, I realized something sharp. He was already looking at me differently. Not as his sister, as his rival, and maybe I was looking back the same way. We thought we were feasting together. We didn't realize we'd already begun the slow act of devouring each other. Chapter 3. It didn't take long for the sweetness to curdle. Money has an aftertaste, and ours began to taste like iron and ash. At first, I told myself the arguments were normal, just the growing pains of abundance, the side effects of learning how to be people we'd never been before. But deep down, I knew the poison had already seeped in. It started with little jabs, careless remarks that pricked sharper than they should have. He mocked me for buying decorative things. "You could have bought stocks, but you bought curtains," he said one morning, sipping his imported espresso like a critic. I shot back that his shiny car was just a metal ego trip, loud enough to scream but empty inside. We laughed, yes, but the laughs had edges. Every purchase became a referendum on character. I wanted to pay off Mom's mortgage quietly, without drama, just hand her a key free of debt. He said I was trying to win her love with money. I wanted to fund a scholarship in our father's name because he never had the chance to go to college. My brother rolled his eyes. Charity is just showing off with better We weren't talking about money anymore. We were talking about worth, about who deserved to be the savior. When the statements arrived, things worsened. He spent 3 times more than me in the first month alone. Designer clothes, watches, a motorcycle, trips I wasn't invited to. I confronted him once, waving the papers like proof in a courtroom. He smirked. "It's my half, isn't it? You don't get to audit me. But wasn't it ours? Wasn't the dream something we had bought together, with the same crumpled bills and the same silly superstition?" I hated how quickly ours turned into mine. The worst was when family began circling. Cousins we hadn't spoken to in years called, suddenly sentimental. "You two always stuck together," they said, as if rehearsed. Aunt Linda sent texts about her urgent medical bills. Mom tried to stay out of it, but even she let slip once that maybe we could help fix the roof. I agreed immediately. He hesitated. "Why should we become their ATM?" he asked. I stared at him, stunned. This was the same boy who once gave his last 20 to a stray dog's vet bill. Money had built a wall where compassion used to stand. One night it exploded. We were at my apartment, pizza boxes on the table, untouched. He accused me of trying to control him, of acting like a saint with my donations and my noble little causes. I accused him of becoming greedy, reckless, blind to everything except shiny objects. The shouting was volcanic, years of sibling rivalry suddenly dressed in designer clothes. At some point, I threw a glass against the wall, shards raining down like punctuation. At some point, he slammed the door so hard the frame cracked. After that, it was open war. He stopped answering my calls. I heard from friends that he was telling people I was the selfish one, hoarding more than my share, manipulating the family against him. He claimed I'd stolen part of the winnings by setting up secret accounts. Lies, but believable lies, because money makes everyone a little paranoid. I wasn't innocent either. I found myself scrolling through his social media, tallying his purchases, screenshotting them like evidence. I told myself I was just keeping records, but really I was keeping score. I even called the bank once, asking questions I had no right to ask. When the clerk said politely that she couldn't disclose details, I hung up, flushed with shame, and yet perversely also with triumph. Because I wanted to catch him. I wanted proof he was worse than me. The irony didn't escape me. We used to share socks, for God's sake. Now I was treating him like a suspect. The breaking point came when Mom invited us both for dinner. She thought maybe we just needed a reminder of who we were. She made lasagna, the kind layered with too much cheese, the kind that used to glue us together as kids. We sat at opposite ends of the table, chewing in silence. Mom tried to spark conversation. "Do you remember the summer at the lake?" Neither of us answered. Finally, he snapped, "Why don't you just ask her, Mom? Ask her who she loves more now that she's the big philanthropist." The fork fell out of my hand. My mother looked between us like she didn't recognize her children anymore. I wanted to scream, to tell him he was wrong, that I wasn't buying anyone's love. But the words tangled in my throat, maybe because part of me feared he was right. The rest of the meal was agony. He stormed out before dessert. Mom cried quietly, scraping plates into the sink. I sat there staring at the empty chair, realizing the money had succeeded where life had failed. It had split us clean down the middle. After that, it wasn't just arguments. It was silence. And silence is more dangerous than any fight. I started dreaming of the ticket itself, waking up drenched in sweat. In my dreams, the numbers melted, rearranged, disappeared. Sometimes I saw him holding it, smirking. Sometimes it crumbled to ash in my hands. I'd wake with my heart racing, staring at the cookbook where I'd first hidden it, as if the paper inside was still sacred. But by then it felt more like a curse. Friends asked what was wrong. I lied. I said my brother was busy. I said I was adjusting. No one believes you when you complain about winning the lottery. The world thinks it's the ultimate blessing. But blessings rot when you feed them too much expectation. One evening, as I sat surrounded by unopened boxes of things I thought I needed, I caught my reflection in a mirror I hadn't even hung yet. My eyes looked hollow, my smile practiced, and I realized with a shiver that I had become what I once despised, someone rich in numbers, bankrupt in soul. The gold had turned to rust, and it was eating us alive. And I knew, with the kind of dread that makes your stomach turn, that this was only the beginning. Chapter 4. There is a particular quiet that comes before a theft, not the hush of secrecy, but the ordinary hum of an appliance you've stopped hearing. My life was that refrigerator. The motor was always on, the door always opened, cold air always kissed my face. I didn't notice the sound until it went missing. The first hint arrived as a courtesy, a pale email, the kind with a logo meant to reassure you that adults are in charge. Temporary security hold, it said in the language of elevators and bank lobbies. Routine, necessary, protective. I stared at the phrase the way you stare at a stranger who knows your name. My stomach tightened into a small, tidy knot. I refreshed the app. My account did not blink. The obscene number that had made me feel both giant and hollow was suddenly asterisks and grayed-out buttons. For your safety, it insisted, as if safety were a corridor they had locked from the outside. I told myself not to panic. We were in the middle of paperwork anyway. Trusts, tax ID numbers, the ceremony of becoming serious about money. 2 weeks earlier, in a conference room with a carpet that hid all sins, we had signed documents with names that sounded like minor deities: pour-over will, irrevocable grantor trust, corporate resolution. The lawyer, boring tie, oatmeal color, had mapped out a structure that would protect us from ourselves and, more importantly, from everyone else. 2 CO trustees, me and my brother, 2 keys for the safe deposit box, 2 signatures required for major transactions. The repetition soothed me, 2, 2, 2, as if symmetry could be armor. But the symmetry had hairline cracks we called convenience. There was a clause, a limited power of attorney for claim execution. It was, the lawyer promised, a simple tool, the kind of thing people sign every day so couriers don't have to circle the block. It would allow either of us to act on behalf of the trust only to finalize the lottery claim, deposit funds, pay initial taxes, and satisfy verification protocols. Temporary, the lawyer said. Narrow. The word temporary has always sounded like a dare. We had also agreed to keep the original ticket in the safe deposit box and carry copies while we waited for the final verification appointment with the state office. Do not lose the original, the lawyer had said without looking up, as if reminding us to breathe. My brother volunteered to take the first shift with the keys. I'm driving past the bank anyway, he said, and the convenience of that sentence slid over my skin like oil. We exchanged smiles because trust makes you generous with laziness. The second hint arrived by courier, a padded envelope with documents for routine consolidation. The cover letter was a masterpiece of soothing verbs: streamline, harmonize, facilitate. I spread the pages on the kitchen table and felt the odd déjà vu of reading words I already regretted. Somewhere in the dense paragraphs was an upgrade to the power of attorney, a widening of limited into necessary to protect the trust's interests. There is nothing more elastic than necessity. Attached, a prepaid return label. All I had to do to keep the machinery purring was sign where the yellow flags told me to. I didn't sign. I tucked the envelope under the cookbook where I had once hidden the ticket like a saint's bone. That night I dreamed of numbers unzipping themselves and falling to the floor like coins. In the morning, the app still showed nothing but polite gray. I called the bank. The hold music was a melody designed for people with more time than pride. When a representative answered, her cheerfulness felt like an allergy. She confirmed the hold was related to risk mitigation during asset migration pursuant to your trustee's instructions. Trustees? Singular? Which trustee? I asked. She read a name that is also my last name, the way you would read a street on a map, my brother. The authorization referenced the power of attorney. For your safety, she repeated, and I discovered a new meaning of the word echo. I hung up and burst into the kind of laughter that sounds like someone trying to cough up a nail. My brother had acted for my safety by moving our money somewhere my login could not find. The fridge hummed sadly. The room tilted, a small adjustment that made the spoon in my coffee cup lean like a landmark after an earthquake. I went to his apartment. The door had that temporary look I hate, scuffed in the places a person touches most when they're leaving for good. Inside, the air was already less his. A rectangle of brighter paint marked the absence of a TV. The red car key was not on the hook. The closet had that moth-wing hush of half-emptiness. On the counter, a folded invoice from a law firm I didn't recognize and a crumpled wristband from a beach club in a city I wasn't invited to. I pressed my hand to the counter like a palm reader and felt nothing I wanted to interpret. When I did find him, it was by accident, an algorithm. A friend sent a screenshot, the modern way to say, I'm sorry you had to see this. My brother was smiling at a pool I could name by the particular blue of its tiles. There were other smiles beside him, the kind you rent by the hour. A bottle of champagne, foam, and bravado. Sunglasses at night. The caption was a dare disguised as humor. I put my phone face down and tried not to throw up. I wrote him a message. Then another. I deleted the third because rage makes grammar stupid. Hours passed in that sticky way they do when your mind is pacing and your body cannot. He finally replied with a paragraph that could have been written by a houseplant if you taught it money. He was centralizing to minimize exposure. The accounts were safer under a single manager until the claim finalized. He would handle everything. He had spoken to counsel for both of us. I pictured him choosing the quotation marks like jewelry. I took the documents from under the cookbook and went to the lawyer. The receptionist had that smile you give to a person whose problem isn't contagious. The lawyer read slowly, lips pressed into the kind of line people draw when they want to look serious in photographs. He nodded in places that made me want to crawl out of my own shoulders. The power of attorney was sufficient, he said. The transfers were lawful, he said. The hold was standard during large interbank migrations. He toggled between legalese and lullaby. This is why you create structures, he offered. To weather interpersonal turbulence. Turbulence is a cute word for a fire. I asked him about the verification appointment. He slid papers at me, a scheduled date, a checklist of originals required, a reminder to bring 2 forms of identification, the undertone of bureaucracy that smells like old paper. You and your brother will both need to be present, he said gently, as if saying you and your oxygen both need to attend breathing. My knees remembered the kitchen tile and made their case for sitting. On the way home, I stopped at the bank and asked to see the safe deposit box. It felt like asking to read my own medical chart, embarrassing in its intimacy, brave in its futility. The clerk checked his screen and smiled that careful smile banks reserve for fireworks. Your CO trustee accessed the box yesterday, she said. I swallowed the tiny fact like a stone. In the vault, the air was the temperature of secrets. The box slid out with a modest metallic sigh. Inside, a single envelope with my brother's handwriting, blocking letters he uses when he wants to look thorough. My name on the front. Inside, a photocopy of the ticket and a receipt for a temporary transfer for safekeeping to a private vault service I had never heard of, somewhere across town where the lobby probably smells like expensive quiet. Also inside, a grocery receipt folded into a neat, infuriating square. Milk, eggs, paper towels, a lottery quick pick from 3 months before our winning numbers. A joke so cheap it cost me breath. I went home and pulled the cookbook open like a door to a church after a scandal. The indentation where the ticket had rested felt like a bruise. In its place, not a copy, he had been too clever for that, but a ticket whose edges looked almost the same. I stared until my eyes watered. The font was right. The perforation was right. The numbers were correct, in the right order, a tiny universe arranged as we remembered it. But the serial strip had a dullness in the light, a brown where there should have been a thin, stubborn green. I held it at an angle. The watermark that had once struck me as a pretty, unnecessary flourish was faint, a ghost at noon, close enough to comfort, far enough to whisper. I blinked hard. That wasn't the problem I was allowed to have today. I told myself practical lies. It's a printing variance, a batch issue. The lottery office will verify the original in the private vault, and this decoy is petty theater. I told myself bigger lies. He would never, not really, not like this. The performance of loyalty in my head was Oscar-worthy. The truth in my gut stayed sitting in the balcony. I gathered my own paper, bank letters, screenshots, the brittle leaf pile of adult life. I filed for an emergency injunction, the legal equivalent of begging someone in a uniform to say, "Stop." The clerk stamped things. The judge's name had the weird solidity of a person whose decisions will change your blood pressure. Expedited hearing, the clerk promised. The word expedited is a dirty joke in government buildings. I walked out feeling like I had thrown a glass of water at a forest fire and clapped for myself. At night, the apartment developed new silences. The refrigerator hummed, the radiator practiced its serpent song, the street gossiped through the window. But inside me there was a vacancy where a person used to sit and say, "It's us against the world." I prowled the rooms inventorying everything I could count because I could not count what mattered. Couch, rug, lamp, quilt, curtains he mocked, books in a language that did not include temporary migration to a safer vehicle, the necklace I had bought, shimmering with a guilt that didn't sparkle in any light. He did, eventually, call. It was late, the hour when confessions dress as logistics. I let it ring twice, then 3 times, because Spite is a theater kid. I didn't put him on speaker. I pressed the phone to my ear like a tourniquet. His voice was flat with the confidence of someone who has already printed the t-shirt. He explained, and the explanations were a pile of reasonable-sounding furniture arranged to hide a hole in the floor. He had consolidated accounts into a single holding company, Red Ribbon Holdings, LLC, for simplicity. He had moved the original ticket off-site because my apartment was a risk. He had retained a tax firm that charged by the minute and smiled by the inch. He used the word fiduciary as if he had just learned it from a cereal box. He avoided the only word that mattered, we. I didn't yell. I let my silence make shapes and hold them up to the light. He filled the quiet with more comfort. It is one of his oldest tricks, narrate until reality falls asleep. He ended with the kind of sentence that sounds like a favor and feels like a funeral. He would handle everything from here. I hung up gently because violence felt too intimate. The hearing came and went like weather you can't name. The judge liked the word status quo more than he liked me. Without evidence of imminent dissipation, his phrase, not mine, he wouldn't intervene. The funds, he pointed out, were still within entities bearing my name. Entities are not the same as access. He smiled with judicial fatigue. Counsel can work it out, he said to rooms like this, every day, until the carpet learned to shrug. I tried one last practical thing. I went to the vault address on the receipt. The lobby was precisely as I had imagined, air-conditioned certainty, thick doors, a polite man who looked like an apology in a suit. He verified that the box had been accessed by my CO trustee, that the contents were secure, that my name was on file, but my key not yet registered. He could not, of course, let me in without both keys present, both signatures committed to the ritual. For your safety, he repeated, and I decided the phrase should be outlawed, unless someone is actively delivering you from a burning building. When I got home, the refrigerator was finally unmistakably quiet. The breaker had tripped while I was gone. I flipped it back and listened to the motor gather itself, a small, brave animal returning to work. The hum returned, ordinary and miraculous. I opened the door and threw away milk that had chosen a new life. I threw away strawberries that had gotten tired of pretending. I threw away leftovers from a dinner I could now narrate only as an artifact of a species that believed it would last. He had taken everything that could be moved by a signature. The remainder was a museum of a person who had believed two meant together and not twice as easy to separate. I sat on the floor and held the decoy ticket up to the window, letting the thin autumn light pass through it. The watermark looked coy. The serial strips sulked. The numbers glowed with the arrogance of alignment. I thought about the exact figure again. $118,642,913, and how specificity had felt like a contract with the universe. I thought about how easily a number can recruit other numbers to build a story you cannot live inside. I thought about the power we surrendered to convenience, to signatures written in offices where coffee tastes like cardboard and decisions smell like carpet. He had taken everything that glittered, but not the thing I didn't yet know I needed, the truth about what, exactly, we were fighting over. That revelation waited like a patient explosion behind the next locked door. When I finally slept, I dreamed of a kitchen tile and knees that remembered how to kneel without begging. I dreamed of a refrigerator humming in an empty house, faithful and dumb, keeping cold what could still be saved. Chapter 5. It all unraveled not with thunder, but with the sigh of paper. The verification day was meant to be cinematic, cameras flashing, officials in suits my brother and I forced to stand shoulder to shoulder like reluctant royalty. Instead, it was fluorescent lighting and a clerk with chipped nail polish yawning through procedure. She reached for the ticket with the bored reverence of someone handling hundreds every week. My brother slid the envelope across the counter with the smug air of a magician producing the ace of spades. And then the silence. The clerk tilted the slip under the scanner, frowned, tried again, tilted it toward the light. My heart began to drum a tattoo against my ribs. My brother cleared his throat, already impatient, already ready to argue. "I'm sorry," the clerk finally said, her voice flat with the weight of routine. "This ticket isn't valid." The words didn't compute. My ears heard them, but my mind chewed air. "What do you mean not valid?" My voice cracked in a register I hadn't used since childhood. "It's counterfeit," she said simply, as though announcing the weather. "It matches a real sequence, but the paper stock, watermark, and validation strip are incorrect. I'll need to confiscate this." She slid it into a plastic sleeve. The sound of the seal clicking shut was louder than gunfire. I turned to my brother. His face was a mask trying to hold too many expressions at once. denial, fury, terror, shame. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. There must be some mistake, he managed, his bravado leaking through the cracks. But there was no mistake. The clerk had the weary certainty of someone who had repeated this sentence before. She gave us a pamphlet about fraud, a form to sign, and then turned to the next customer. That was it. No fireworks, no congratulations, no champagne, just two siblings standing in a government office clutching paperwork that declared us not winners but fools. The walk outside was endless. The sky was indifferent, the air neither kind nor cruel. We sat on a bench, the kind bolted into concrete to remind you how temporary rest is. For a long time, neither of us spoke. My brother kept rubbing his palms together as if he could generate a different reality from friction. I just stared at the pigeons, wishing they would laugh so I didn't have to. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. Did you know? His eyes darted away, and in that dart I had my answer. Maybe he hadn't known at first. Maybe he had convinced himself of some half-truth, but at some point he had realized. And instead of telling me, he had doubled down, carried the illusion like a crown, built castles in the sand while the tide watched patiently. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to shake him until words came out. But what good are words when the stage itself has been revealed as cardboard? We had ruined ourselves for nothing. All the fights, the accusations, the sleepless nights, the silence that had poisoned dinners, the family torn into factions, the trust dissolved into suspicion, every venomous word we'd thrown, every secret bank move, every glass shattered against the wall, all of it was for a ghost. There was no fortune, only paper. It was almost funny, and maybe that was the cruelest part. I felt laughter bubble in my throat like acid, but it never escaped. Instead, I wept. Not for the money, we never had it, but for the versions of us that believed, for the siblings who used to share socks and secrets, who once dreamed together without the shadow of greed. They had died over a piece of paper that meant less than a grocery receipt. My brother muttered something. Apologies, excuses, I don't know. I couldn't listen. His voice sounded like static. The pigeons scattered at some unseen signal, rising into the air with a grace neither of us could imitate. I walked away. I didn't look back. In the days after, silence returned, but it was a different kind. Not war, not strategy, not suspicion, just vacancy. I blocked his number. Mom asked questions I couldn't answer. Friends wanted stories I refused to tell. How could I explain that the wealth we fought over never existed? How could I confess that the real prize wasn't dollars but destruction? At night, I still dream of that number. $118,642,913. It floats in the dark like a cruel star, glimmering with the illusion of rescue. I wake up with tears dried stiff on my cheeks and the taste of rust in my mouth. People say money changes you. They're wrong. The idea of money changes you faster. The promise, the mirage, the shimmering what if. It corrodes loyalty, it weaponizes love, it makes a brother into a stranger and a sister into an enemy. And the punchline? There never was any gold. Only rust, only us and what we broke. So here I sit, poorer than before, stripped not of wealth but of blood. The cruelest lottery of all, to win nothing, yet lose everything.